Good afternoon. My name is Rafał Pankowski, and it is my pleasure on behalf of the Never Again Association to welcome everyone to the session under the title How to Counter Denial and Distortion of the Genocide of the Roma in the Context of the War and Displacement. This activity is conducted as part of a bilateral exchange project focused on the effective implementation and use of the resources of the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance with the support of the NIGDY network within the framework of IRA activities. So within this exchange project, our friend Jelena Sirbu from Moldova, the founder of the Women Roma platform Romni, has visited the Never Again Association in Warsaw. And this session is a direct result of that initiative, that project. I want to welcome all the participants, all the guests, including activists, academics, practitioners, representatives of the refugee protection sector, and members of diverse communities, including I recognize many who have participated in our initiative, Minorities for Peace. Now I would like to give the floor to our moderator for today, our friend from India, Sayan Lodh. Sayan is a PhD scholar at the Department of History, Presidency University, Kolkata in India, and also a correspondent member of the Never Again Association in Poland. Sayan, the floor is yours, please.
Yes, so thank you, Professor Pankowski, for the wonderful introduction. So, firstly, I would like to remind the audience that the meeting will be recorded, and I request them to keep themselves on mute and put their questions in the chat box, if any. So, with that, I would like to welcome our first speakers, who will be speaking on ERA, Miriam Karoli and Stephanie Lederi. Firstly, Miriam Karoli, she is the office manager at the Vienna Wiesenthal Institute for Holocaust. She is a member of the Austrian delegation to the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or ERA, and chairs the ERA Committee on the Genocide of the Roma this year. In the past, she headed the OSCE contact point for Roma and Sinti issues at the OSCE Office for Human Rights and Democratization in Warsaw. She is also a member of the Ethnic Group Advisory Council for the Roma in Austria and an honorary member of the Romanos Centro. Stefan Lederich is the director of the Roma Foundation Zurich, since a position he has held since 1999. He has also been a member of the Swiss delegation to the ERA since 2021 and the author of several books and publications on history, language, as well as on more actual and political issues. I would like to welcome our first speakers, Miriam and Stephanie, to the screen. Thank you.
So thank you for the moderator and thank you for the organizers having invited me. I feel very privileged but also humble at the same time, especially with regard to the topic on how to counter denial and distortion of the genocide of the Roma in the context of war and displacement. Since I feel that IRA is rather a standard-setting body, but not a body that works particular in a conflict situation. Anyhow, I think there might be some relevant thoughts we might want to explore. And I would like to start with giving a short introduction into the work of the IRA, in particular with regard to the genocide of the Roma, and then hand over to my colleague Stefanie Lederich, who will continue speaking about distortion of the genocide of the Roma and recent research on this. So between, and I will start maybe with one picture to introduce into the topic. The next slide. Okay, I will continue speaking while maybe the slides will be showing. Between 1933 and 1945, European Roma faced persecution, violence, and genocide at the hands of the Nazis and their collaborators. Hundreds of thousands of Roma men, women, and children were murdered, while countless others were subjected to forced labor, sterilization, and medical experiments. Despite this history of persecution, the genocide of the Roma remains under-acknowledged and under-researched, and was denied to be a racial persecution under the Nazi for several post-war decades. This meant that the victims and their suffering were not recognized and did not receive compensation. Their history was not researched nor educated and remembered, while the perpetrators were not brought to justice and crimes against Roma were not delegitimized. Many of the surviving generations and their descendants were traumatized, while racism and discrimination continued unbroken. Next slide, please. If you can go to the next slide, Natalia. Thank you. A significant public attempt to protest about the lack of recognition was done by German Sinti and Roma, with the key figure of Romani Rose, whose father and uncle Vincent and Oskar Rose survived the war. In 1979, the Sinti organizations in Germany hosted the first public event in a former concentration camp. And you can see it here in the picture. It was in Bergen-Belsen. And they had invited Simone Weil, a Jewish survivor, who was also as a child in Bergen-Belsen, but at that time was head of the European Parliament. And this way, because they had this public figure, the German Sinti gained international public attention. So it was a first breakthrough to go into a bigger, really also a tentative event. Several years later, they continued to work with a kind of these provocative actions. In 1982, the German Federal Chancellor confirmed that the persecution of Roma and Sinti under the National Socialism was a racial persecution and it constitutes a crime of genocide. However, it took several more decades until other countries followed this example. Next slide, please. The International Holocaust, maybe I say something to this slide. I just show this because this is the European memorial built up in Berlin in 2012 to remember the Holocaust of Roma and Sinti in Europe. And it's very significant if you look at the date. The decision for this memorial was passed in 1992, but it took 20 years until the memorial was established. And it gives a very good idea how reluctant societies are to kind of remember what has happened to Roma and Sinti in Europe, but also publicly educate about it. Next slide, please. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, founded in the year 2000 with the Stockholm Declaration, covers today over 30 countries. They reaffirmed the commitment, a world without Holocaust, a world without genocide, with their ministerial declaration in the year 2020. And in 2020, they also incorporated a strong commitment on promoting recognition, research and education, and commemoration of the genocide of the Roma. I put here also a bit provocative, a picture where I'm also involved right now in Austria, in Vienna. The Roma civil society demands to have a central memorial for Sinti and Roma and the victims of the Holocaust erected, which is still not in place. And you see the picture of a photo action which we continue doing since last November in order to demonstrate how important it is to have it. But I wanted also to show that while we have the memorial in Germany, in many other countries, we are not yet there. The International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance operates through a number of working groups. Only in 2007, a sub-working group on the genocide of the Roma started to take off, and this was later transformed into the Committee on the Genocide of the Roma. So in this committee, and this is how the IRA operates, We have public servants, politicians, historians, educators, experts, archives, researchers represented to discuss jointly in a very, I would say, dialogue format, how we can work together in order to promote the recognition, the research, the education, and the remembrance of the Roma genocide. A big step forward of this committee within the IRA was the adoption of the non-legally binding working definition on anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma racism. Next slide, please. And I would like to quote just shortly from the working definition on anti-Gypsyism, because it's also available in Ukrainian language. I put here the links, but also in Romanian language in case you want to look up the whole resource on the working definition on anti-Gypsyism. But it's quite interesting. It says also anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma racism, discrimination did not start nor end after the Nazi era, but continues to be a central element in crimes perpetrated against Roma. In spite of the important work done by the United Nations, the European Union and the Council of Europe, or the OSCE in Europe, and other international bodies, the stereotypes and prejudices about Roma have not delegitimized or discredited vigorously enough so that they continue to persist and can be deployed largely unchallenged. And I wanted to give this quote because I think it shows very clearly that there is a recognition that this non-recognition exists until today and of course has a relevance in a situation where you have a humanitarian crisis, or we look at refugees and how Roma are treated there or within the displacement context. The IRA recommendation enacts, so the results of the committee is first having done this non-legally binding working definition on anti-Gypsyism, which was adopted in the year 2020. And another good result was the recommendations on teaching and learning about the persecution and genocide of the Roma during the Nazi era. This is a tool which kind of tries to have accurate historical narratives promoted and inclusive education, supporting efforts to integrate Roma history into school curricula and advocating for international standards in teaching about this genocide. And of course, also then relating to what we face today. This tool is possible to download from the website of the IRA. I put again here the link. Unfortunately, it's not yet translated into Ukrainian, Moldovan, or Romanian language. However, it's available in English language, and I hope soon also in other languages, which maybe you can use within your work as well. So this teaching recommendations was drafted by the IRA's experts and political community in collaboration with Roma organizations and international experts. And they should serve to provide policymakers and educators with effective approaches to teaching this long overlooked history. So I think I stop here, not to make too much of my time, and would like to hand over to Stefane to continue with talking about distortion of the genocide of the Roma.
So, can you see the slides?
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
So, Lacho Dias. Thank you for the invitation. As I was told, I'm the director of the Roma Foundation, which is a foundation which worked in the 90s pretty much all over Europe, funded by George Soros at that time, and now is more on the political side, but also working with refugees, quite a few Ukrainian refugees, Roma refugees here in Switzerland lately. So this is one of the things. So one of the projects that we started in the Committee on the Genocide of the Roma is distortion about the genocide in media and social media. This is a project that we did. We started in London thinking about it, and then we launched this working together with several people. So it's right now, the scope is France, Italy, Austria, Germany, Switzerland, Croatia, Serbia, Slovenia, Czechia, Slovakia, Poland, and Ukraine. And we'll see where we go. So several people, because it's definitely not easy to do that as one person. And the research on Slovakia and Czechia is still ongoing at this stage. The other one is more or less pretty much complete. So what are the challenges when you're starting to look for distortion on social media? Well, you start by looking at Facebook, TikTok, X, Twitter, and while there are some entries about the genocide, most of the distortion and the racism is kept within private groups. So it's very difficult to get in there unless you register yourself in those things, which is not exactly the thing you want to do when you're doing this kind of research. So we switched fairly fast to other media, and what proved to be very successful are comments on articles and comments on posts that are posted on newspapers, online, but also on social media. So effectively, people, when they are commenting on press articles or on posts on Facebook, are quite unhinged, and it gives you quite a good overview of what they are saying about the genocide of the Roma and such. One of the key challenges is that in most cases, those posts or those comments mix both genocide denial and distortion with outright racism. I mean, to give a typical example of what you can see is one which says, if Hitler had finished his job, we wouldn't have this problem now. Very common. How do you put that one? It's racism, but it's also mixing the genocide in there. So this is one of the difficulties that we've, and we decided to list what we found just to see. So here are a few examples from various countries. Well, before, what are the most common distortions? Well, the most common one is still denying the racial persecution of Roma and the racial nature of the genocide. So they say, oh, they were persecuted because they were asocials, they didn't want to work, and all these kind of things. It is still very common in 2026, unfortunately, still. Stereotypes. All the stereotypes are still being used, and they're used generally to partly give justification to what happens and why it was done. So they're thieves, they're anyhow not working, they're only begging, all these kind of things. So worthless people using all the stereotypes to justify what happens. Relativization is still very common also. So, oh, but there were only so few victims. If you count in comparison to the Jewish or to the Russian victims of World War II, it's a small number, etc. So this kind of relativization is still very common. And this comes to what we call the number games, which is essentially playing with the number of victims. And you have, honest to be very frank, there are two sides. There are the ones who minimize the number, saying, oh, there were very few documented victims, which unfortunately in the document part is true. And then you have some activists who go overboard and claim that 2.5 million Roma were killed during the war, which is also unfortunately a distortion, because that's not quite the reality. So I think there, this is something one has to be aware of. So a few examples. Lucy Fukova, who is the ombudsman for Roma affairs in Czech Republic currently, made a comment on television about saying education is key to preventing tragedies such as the Roma Holocaust. The teaching of Roma Holocaust history in school is dismal. And then if you look at the comments that were there, it says, one, well, if you start sending your children to school and they at least manage to stay through the entire elementary level, then you can dictate what should be taught in schools. The Roma Holocaust never happened. Only the Jews experienced the Holocaust. The Roma were in concentration camp, but they did not go through what the Jews did. Or, sure, my great-grandfather was Rom, but genetically he was half Jewish, so I guess he only experienced the concentration camp and the whole Holocaust halfway. Too bad no one explained that to him. So comments like this, very common. And Poland, 80 years ago, on August 1st, 1944, at 5 p.m., a genocide of Varsovian, 200 to 250,000 victims, provoked by the Allies broke out. Within just 3 days, the 30th Dielewanger Division, composed of Germans, 240 Gypsies, 400 Russian, 120 Ukrainians, and 258 Jews, murdered 65,000 Poles. No comments. This is falsification, distortion, and so on. But still, it's in 2025, last year, in Poland. In Slovenia, we have a very different case because quite a few of the Roma were killed by partisans. So by the communist partisans, and they were officially killed because they were supposed to have been collaborator. There were comments, quite a few comments to this day, saying no, the partisans did not do this, or they were only it was only done because the Roma were collaborating with the Nazis during that period in Slovenia. To this day, actually, Slovenia, the mayor of Ljubljana, refuses to bury roughly 200 Roma victims of a massacre in the cemetery in Ljubljana, devoted to victims of the World War II. Croatia, there, I don't know if you know the situation in Croatia, but Croatia killed pretty much all Roma during World War II. If you want to find Croatian Roma who survived World War II, you have to go to Milan, where there are 5 or 6 families who survived and fled in 1944. All the rest were effectively eradicated. But still, one can document a fairly high number, more than 16,000 Roma who are known by name, who were killed. But people say, show me the bones of those 16,000, etc. Or if Hitler had had more time, there would not have been that gypsy gang, etc. Something, a variation of what I told you before. So, Serbia, another case, there they deny that Serbian police was actually collaborating in some cases with the Nazis and actually deported and killed Roma also, and Jews. So a lot of denial about Serbian involvement in the genocide, especially in view of the fact the communist narrative afterwards saying the partisans liberated, and which is true, the country, and all the partisans were Serbs, and none of the Serbs collaborated. So again, one of those distortions. So I think that's 4 examples. I can give orally a few more examples. Let me stop sharing. So one of the other examples that one can give is Askovic, Dragoljub Askovic from Serbia, wrote a book about Jasenovac and Roma in Serbia, saying that 200,000 Roma were killed in Jasenovac. No, I mean, this is definitely an exaggeration also. So we have to be very careful about saying, when we speak about the genocide, to be really, really accurate in the statements one makes. Statements that you can make and which are very clear: Croatia and Czechia and Estonia were totally, all Roma were killed. In Poland, in Ukraine, especially in Western Ukraine, and in the Baltic states, it's roughly on the 50% mark. The numbers we will unfortunately never know. Thank you for your attention. So if you have any questions, comments, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, thank you, Miriam and Stefani. Now, there is already a question from Professor Pankowski. If any of the audience have any questions, please put them down in the chat. So Professor Pankowski's question is a very general question. So how can we commemorate instances of genocide and fight distortion while avoiding a competition of victimhood?
So you can imagine that this is definitely a topic that exists in the IRA, because clearly we have on one side the IRA is originally a Jewish organization, and on the second side there is a committee on the genocide of the Roma. So I think lots of progress has been made. First of all, here in this particular case, we have said Jews and Roma were persecuted for the same reasons, on racial grounds. So it was not because, what did I say? So it is not the number of victims, it is effectively the source of the persecution, which is the important aspect. You cannot compete with the number of Jewish victims, definitely not. The number of Roma victims will never be known, because we didn't know how many Roma there were before and how many there were after. So suffering was there. So you can state there, you should not compare. One has to avoid a comparison. Oh, it was because of that, or it was more. No, both groups and others also for other reasons were persecuted and killed. And what is key, it was a genocide, and that's recognized. And I think also the Jewish organizations are beginning to accept it. Actually, Danny Dayan, who was the chair of the IRA last year, but also the director of the Yad Vashem Museum, said in Auschwitz, we suffered together, we lived through this together, and were persecuted for the same reason during the Holocaust. That was in his speech 2 years ago on the 80th anniversary of the destruction of the Zigeunerlager in Auschwitz.
Maybe just to add to this, because I mentioned before the teaching recommendations, there is exactly something, how do you teach about the genocide of the Roma? And it states very clearly that it's important not to compare and respect each genocide and sufferings in its own case. And I think that's really key, that there is no victim hierarchy, no comparison, but rather understand what it meant for this particular people and for this particular people. And maybe I can just, because there are no questions, also add up to what Stefane said. I mentioned before that we at the moment demand here for having a central memorial for the victims of the Roma in Austria, because in Austria also over 90% of the Roma were exterminated under the National Socialism. And what is very interesting, there were some newspaper who picked up our campaign for it, and it was shared then on Instagram and social media. I should actually send it to Stefane. And it was extreme what negative comments we received on that campaign. And there was a heavy debate even within the community. Should we really do it? Because, you see now what anti-gypsyism and racism, it's just stimulated. I think we have to have this debate because it also shows what challenges still exist in society.
Hello, Professor Rafał Pankowski. Do you want to comment on this, Professor Pankowski?
No, thank you very much for this response. Thank you, I appreciate it.
Okay, so in that case, I also had a question to Stefan and Miriam. Any of you can answer that. So from your presentation, a little bit that I came to understood that primarily in Western Europe, that is Germany, over there, this Roma Holocaust is more or less recognized. But in Eastern Europe and the Balkans, there it's high chances of it being distorted. So is it responsible due to the Cold War politics of that region, with the Eastern Europe and these regions mostly falling within the communist sphere and the other Western side falling within the capitalist sphere?
No, I mean, the Germans are exactly as bad as the Poles or the Czechs or everybody. I mean, French deny any kind of involvement. The Italian deny any kind of involvement either. So distortion is common everywhere. I mean, we had one tweet from an Israeli politician who said, one cannot say that everything that Hitler did was bad. Just look at the case of gypsies as such.
Yeah.
So
from an Israeli, that's right.
It may be important to understand you cannot do a divide between East and West. I mentioned this German example because it was actually to demonstrate how late in a country has recognized the genocide against the Roma, which was in 1982 in Germany. Late enough, I would say, because it's 4 decades after the end of the war. And as I said, the memorial was only built in 2012. In Austria, for example, it only started inspired by Germany, to be a topic in the late 1980s. And I mean, officially recognition was never there. It was kind of an indirect recognition that as of 1995, when a fund for the victims of the National Socialism for all those who have not received any compensation was created, that also Roma who has not received any compensation could apply for that. So, you have very different mechanisms, but I think it's important to understand it's not an East and West. But I wanted to show that in Germany, there was quite a successful and strong lobby of Sinti survivors who I think were very inspiring for all Europe.
Okay, so thank you. If there are any questions from the audience, you please write them in the chat. Yes, there are no more questions, I guess. So now we'll move on to the next part of the program. So I'll invite Christoph Weilich for his comments. He is the coordinator of the NKT network, currently based in Berlin. Christoph, the screen is yours.
So thank you so much, Sayan. Thank you, everybody, for organizing this event. I will keep it very, very shortly. I hope you can understand me. Unfortunately, I couldn't make it into the office, so I'm in a cafe and it's quite noisy here.
No,
so I will
okay.
keep it, nonetheless, I will keep it really, really short. So I just wanted to address that as NKT sessions like this, as the coordinator of NKT, which I took over in January of this year, events like this are exactly what we are doing this for. I'm really, really happy and pleased that we can organize and fund with the help of the IRA, with the help of the foreign embassy, foreign administration of German government, that we can fund such projects and programs. And I think the exchange in between professionals is exactly what we are aiming at, what we are having as a goal. And I'm really, really glad and happy that events like this, that sessions like this happen within our framework and that you guys organize that. So that will be my remarks. If you have any questions concerning NCARTE, feel free to contact me. Feel free to address me in the chat as well. But I will be quiet now, and I'm just enjoying the session, and I'm really, really looking forward to learn now from the bilateral exchange that we helped to organize and helped and supported with the help and financial help as well from IRA. So thank you guys, and please enjoy the rest of the session, and I'll be gladly contacted via chat, or just feel free to contact me via email. Thank you all.
Thank you, Christoph, for your comments. Actually, we now have another question for our previous speakers, Stephanie and Miriam. So it is being asked by Rukmini Iyer. So could the speakers please share some forms of restitution or symbolic recognition that have been attempted, and where do they fall short?
So first of all, financial compensation never happened, or nearly almost did not happen, only for a few people in Germany. Very difficult to actually, it was very difficult to prove. It was taken very, very late, so a lot of people had died already. In some cases, you had to prove that somebody was killed in a concentration camps, where the Germans were not exactly the greatest documentary and did not issue documents for that. So financial recognition, especially in Eastern Europe, none. There was a bit when the Swiss Holocaust Fund, Swiss Banking Holocaust Fund gave some money, 1,000 Swiss francs to Roma who were in the Holocaust, whose families were in the Holocaust. That was in the late 90s. That was the banking sector who did a mea culpa at that time, but it was a drop in the ocean. Symbolic, I mean, most governments effectively acknowledge the genocide nowadays. I'm not aware of anybody denying it, so definitely not. And they do, in many countries, celebrate or commemorate the 2nd of August, which is the official commemoration date for the genocide of the Roma. So that exists in most countries.
Maybe I can just add also from the Austrian example, because it's so telling that what I mentioned before, and Stefane said that there was the denial of the genocide against the Roma. Of course, this had an impact on any forms of restitutions or compensation. And for example, in Austria, we had one of the biggest Roma concentration camps in Europe, in Lackenbach. People who were interned in Lackenbach, they were not receiving any compensation, because the blame was that they were persecuted not because of racial persecution, but of a crime preventive measure. So they continued with the Nazi jargon and thinking, after the Second World War. And that was a big challenge to overcome in order to lobby for compensation of Roma and Sinti. That's why it was so important that the racial persecution of Roma and Sinti is acknowledged. So that, you change also this, stigmatizing that they were persecuted as a crime prevention measure. But so in Austria, for example, in 1961, when the compensation laws were released, many Roma, in fact, could not apply for compensations. And later on, because there was a great lobbyism, of course, also from some historians, they could receive some compensation, but that was also interesting because they were kind of second-class victims. So the camps which were built up only to concentrate Roma or Sinti people, where people who were there would not receive the same amount of compensation that Roma who were interned in other concentration camps, or not Roma, but other people or Jewish people, for example. So there you could see this problematic hierarchization, but also non-recognition. And similar what Stefan said to the Swiss Fund, which was then given to Roma in Europe, in Austria. I mentioned before the National Fund for the victims of the persecution of the National Socialism, which was set up in 1995. And at that time, the idea was to give a symbolic gesture and a kind of a payment to all, also Roma people who have not yet received a compensation. And the idea was to give these people a kind of compensation. But at that time, many people who were survivors were already dead. So it's a very cynical thing. They then changed the law that also the second generation could apply. So if you had a family member, but still, of course, it for many, unfortunately, who survived the National Socialism, this came too late. And I just wanted to give the example because I think it shows also, you know, what impact it had. Yeah, if you think that several decades after the war, you know, people were simply denied not only the status, but anything which comes along. And that was heavily traumatizing people, not only the first, but also the second and third generation.
Thank you for your answer. Mikola, I guess you had some question or comment. If you want, you can
Thank
ask
you.
now, Mikola.
Thank you. I have one question or maybe comment. I just, sorry for my voice, I'm totally sick today. Now artificial intelligence is becoming the main source for information for people, and actually I'm interested in how artificial intelligence shows that this topic, genocide of Roma, and it will be quite interesting to compare the difference between how describe intelligence AI in different languages. Maybe you did something in your research.
So on artificial intelligence, no, not yet. I've done some trial and error in a few languages I speak. I did in French, German, English, and mostly in those ones. At least in the ones that I tried on ChatGPT and on Gemini, they tend to stick to what the Council of Europe and the OSCE have in terms of response as such. So it's a very generic thing, but it's at least it's not distortion. They decide the 500,000 victims and the racial persecution, but they still have the tendency to put the Roma, you know, it's Jews, and then a list of things, and the Roma are in the somewhere at the back of the list of things. So it's Jews, Poles, Russians, homosexuals, Roma, Jehovah's Witnesses, and so on. So that's also a bit of a distortion as such there. So far, I haven't tried it in some other language. My Polish is a bit rusty. Such Russians I didn't try. So that's so far we've got. We'll definitely keep track on it yet. Thanks.
I see. Thank you.
Yes, so thank you, Professor Humaniuk, for your question. Professor Mykola Humaniuk is a sociology professor at Kherson University, Ukraine. So now we'll move on to our next presenters, Natalia Sineva and Elina Shirbu. So Natalia Sineva is a researcher of Holocaust denial and distortion in Eastern Europe, including Moldova and Romania, the United Nations Minority Fellow, and a member of the Never Again Association and the co-founder of the Minorities for Peace Initiative. Elina Sirbu is a journalist and a researcher. She is the founder of the Roma Women platform Romni in Moldova and an United Nations Minority Fellow. They would be presenting on strategies to identify and respond to denial in humanitarian settings. So now the screen is yours, Natalia and Elena. I invite you to present your presentation. Thank
Thank you. Thank you very much, Sayan. And thank you very much to the previous speakers for your comprehensive presentations. And I believe there maybe will be more questions later to you as well. So if you are staying also after our presentation, we could have a more sophisticated joint discussion. So I will also share my screen, but first I would like to mention at the beginning that activities that we are doing and this session today, which we are organizing, are part of a bilateral exchange supported by Venkatya, which was also already mentioned by our colleague Christoph from Venkatya Network and supported by the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance. But it is also a part of our Minorities for Peace initiative, which we have been developing in Eastern Europe since 2023 with several of our partners and colleagues who are also present today. And this is my colleague Yelena Sirbu, who will be speaking later, the founder of the Romni organization in Moldova, but also our colleague from Kherson, sociology professor Mikola Humaniuk, who just talked just some minutes ago, and Valentin Jaronkin, who will be speaking later, and our colleague Rukmini Ayer, who also asked a question from Mumbai. So it's a very international initiative. And we know that refugees are not a homogeneous group. They're different in ethnicity, in religion, in gender, disability, and of course it shapes the experience of displacement, being refugees or being internally displaced people. And I would like also to stress that our initiative is driven by minorities themselves and migrants and refugees themselves. So we are who are presenting here, we are all minorities. And it had been focusing on empowering and supporting displaced minorities and indigenous communities, including from such countries as Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, but also other parts of Europe, and who have been hugely impacted by the war in many different ways. And through our work, we have also identified different challenges and gaps. Host communities here in Poland or in Moldova or in Austria or in other countries, they might have very little experience with such a diversity. And for example, Poland, it was diverse before the Second World War, when it was mono-ethnic, mono-religious, and now because of a war, it is getting diverse again because many refugees, Ukrainian refugees, are coming to Poland, and they're all diverse, including Roma. So host communities probably not experienced, and the Roma people remain the most vulnerable among them. Refugees are vulnerable, but the Roma people are the most vulnerable. And it has also been linked to the historical injustice they have been facing, and we had two excellent presentations before. Presenting this in depth. So in our work across Moldova, Ukraine, Poland, we have identified that Roma communities also remain among the most vulnerable, which is also close linked to injustice, including slavery. And we know in some parts of Europe, for example, in Romania, the slavery has been existing till the 19th century, and the genocide during the Second World War. And we also should remember that behind we have all real people with real stories and suffering of these people. So we should think also about this when we are talking today. And now I would like to share my screen. So if you share my, see my screen, together with my colleague Yelena Sirbu, we have been involved in in identifying gaps in humanitarian protection responses that are influenced by historical context. And I would like to mention and to stress that this is just the beginning of our work, which we started in this field. And based on this, we have been also trying to develop practical strategies, a kind of toolkit, drawing on approaches of International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, but also Yelena's field research in Moldova in depth. So the aim is to help humanitarian protection actors identify denial, identify distortion in practice, and understand the impact and respond with concrete action. So we are focusing on humanitarian and protection sector. And the key idea is simple. Denial can lead to, and distortion leads to stereotypes, which we have discussed. Stereotypes lead to discrimination and it leads to exclusion. And this results in gaps in humanitarian work and in protection sector. And this is how historical narratives translate into real humanitarian consequences. For example, distortion can also appear in statements such as Roma were not real victims, all refugees are the same, or through stereotypes portraying Roma as social or criminals. The impact of a Roma is that Roma are not recognized as a group with a special needs, which leads to unequal access to services, overlooked barriers such as language or documentation, lack of trust in institutions, and underrepresentation in protection systems at the end. And to respond, we need to work and to develop training on history, intersectionality, exclusion of Roma in protection frameworks, and targeted outreach. It is also important, essential to work with Roma mediators and Roma organizations and apply community-based approaches and build trust and ensure access to protection. So this is it should be a collaborative work together with people involved in humanitarian sector and with protection sector, but also human rights organizations, even historians and Roma themselves, something which we can not easily immediately think about connecting people from protection, humanitarian sectors with historians, with IRA approaches to identify denial, distortion of a genocide of a Roma. But this is something we think is important and should be addressed to deal with this issue. And now I would like to also to invite my colleague, Yelena Sirbu, who will show how these patterns translate into real protection gaps. Thank you.
Thank you so much, colleagues, to join this event. It's really important for us. For us, that we have a number of more than 12 million Roma people here in Europe. And unfortunately, 80% of them living in poverty, facing daily discrimination and marginalization. And because we as a Roma do not have our own state, and as a dispersed people, we have lacked a narrative of a collective homeland or return to the motherland. Mostly Roma have lived in poverty, facing discrimination. So what I noticed when the war started in 2022, in end of the March, when Russian attacked Ukraine, I noticed this denied, first of all, as a victim of the war, as a refugee. Like, they're not real refugee. No Roma, no problem. That was the attitude that met instantly refugee when they came here in Moldova. Throughout history and to this day, Roma have been denied their basic human rights, dignity, and freedom. They are dealing with the long-term consequence of a stigma as a Roma identity, and of course, as a transgenerational trauma. I remember very well that marked me at that time in 2022, early in April, when the flood of refugee was huge into Moldova. And I met a large group of Roma that came from Kharkov. And I went to this group, a Roma woman group, old people, old Roma. And after a brief discussion with them, I suggest to them that Moldova is a poor country, actually. Why not? Because we at that time have organized transportation to Europe, where you can have access to more services, I tell them. And one Roma woman, old woman, say, that exactly what my grandparents was promised, a better life. The oldest of them replied to me very calmly. And then she say, but they were loaded in train wagon with thousands of other Roma and transported to Buch, from where they never return. So this make me to feel and to understand this trauma, transgeneration trauma, is actually follow us till now and will follow our kids if we are not do some action to stop this. But it's hard because discrimination, filter of racism, still till now that barely affect Roma community. So in Moldova, we have a lot of vulnerabilities when we are talking about Roma in general, but when we are talking about refugee, this person can be double or even triple discriminated. And first of all, is denied their situation, is denied that they are not refugee. So what happened is that a lot of Roma refugee have double citizenship, Moldovan and Ukrainian. So when they run because of the war, they speak as well an Moldovan language, I mean Romanian. So at the border, first problem say, okay, first your identity card is fake and you are not a real refugee. So we start to have this denying of their citizenship and of them as a victim of the war. As well, we have psychological distress, of course, unfortunately, family separation, lack of information in Roma language and in different dialects, because it's a very big variety of Roma community, especially living in Ukraine, actually more than in Moldova. Lack of documentation, limited access to services, low school enrollment, high illiteracy, risk of violence and exploitation, and risk to become victim of trafficking. Vulnerabilities, different vulnerabilities that, as I say, double or triple discrimination as a Roma, ethnic, as a woman, or as a person with disability. So we in Moldova, unfortunately, had from straight away, from early in April 2022, segregation of centers. So why I actually accept this collaboration with Never Again Association? First is because this toolkit supposed to be shared between NGOs, between humanitarian worker, and of course between international organization, a local or central level, because it's very important to see their attitude, how they behavior with Roma. Because here in Moldova, we have experience that people working in a humanitarian organization, big organization, have stereotypes about Roma, and they didn't accept Roma. They didn't give to the Roma the same item as a refugee non-Roma. So, Natalia, please, if you can, 4 pages on our slide. Thank you. So, of course, discrimination and systemic challenges, because this inequality exists already. So we have expulsion from accommodation center, was a mayor who expelled the whole family with small kids, Roma kids, out from the center just because they was wearing a long skirt, and because they didn't want to eat the food. So was just an obstacle to understand their needs, the Roma family needs. Also we had a situation when in refugee center, non-Roma refugee, I mean Ukrainian citizen, didn't want, and they make a boycott to accept Roma refugee in the shelter. So that was a very big issue because, of course, on each situation we was involving and try to first of all spread this, let's say, equal attitude, but without institution, we cannot do nothing. So that's why, starting from 22, we have a lot of partnership with other organization, with the state institution, just to promote equality and non-discrimination attitude for refugees. So as I say, we have segregation accommodation, barriers to healthcare, lack of documentation, employment, discrimination, language barrier, and high risk of GBV and early marriage. So, colleagues, first of all, I want to share with you my thought about Roma from Ukraine. So Roma from Ukraine came in Moldova with very low level of inclusion. Till now, we have places in segregate places in Odessa Oblast that they live in Tabor. I mean, it's a space just for Roma. They don't have school. They don't have really access to the healthcare. They don't have access to the information. So the unique source of information, it's TikTok, it's Facebook, Instagram, and so on. But as colleague Mikola, I think, from Ukraine mentioned that in our time, the IE, it's very high distributed and so on. So we Roma people can be very easy became victim of fake news, and this is a real problem for us actually. Next slide, please. So what we do? First of all, we make a trust between, even we are Roma, I'm telling you very honestly now, we need time and trust between us. So we build this trust between Roma and non-Roma, Moldovan Roma and Ukrainian Roma. We had a Roma mediator who work in Roma language, spreading information in their dialects about access for the services. So that's one thing. Secondly, it was very important to support Roma NGOs from Moldova to have access to the resources, to have access for the humanitarian aid straight to the Roma refugee. And what I notice, my personal view on that, is that when they understand that actually we can help them, give them information, referral cases, get involved on absolutely each individual situation, discrimination on the hospital, discrimination in the school, on the street, everything what is related to Roma community, and they ask us to help, we try our best to do it. So everything what was related to information and our trust between Roma NGO from Moldova and Roma community from Ukraine was built step by step. That's one thing. Secondly, when they understand that we can actually help them, they didn't really want to go to the non-Roma organization because they feel this approach, linguistic approach, cultural approach. So we, for them, remain till now actually a point, focal point of information, of asking help, documentation, and so on. And also because mostly like 85% of the Roma refugee here in Moldova, I don't know in other countries, was women, kids, and elderly people. We invest in our mediator that work straight with them. So 75% of our Roma mediator was women. So that was a capacity building actually for Roma women that try to help another Roma woman and have this gender sensitive support, which is very important for Roma because as a woman, traditional Roma woman, she have to feel very safe, very confident to say something about her situation. Or another problem I remember now that, because traditional Roma, if she's not cooking for her family, she's not feeling confident, she's not feeling mother, she's not feeling woman. That's why mostly of them didn't, didn't want to live in a center. Because first of all, they have some specific traditional thing, traditional food, traditional behavior, traditional clothes, and it's not acceptable for them to live in other space with another man or even woman. So what I want to say that this gender sensitive support was really important. First of all, to identify early marriage, to identify GBV cases, and to get to them with very well information, to at least to protect them and to give to them information, of course, was their option what to do next. But we inform them about services, about help that we can do for them if they are real victim of, for example, of violence. So what I suggest that in our toolkit to have very concrete inputs, very concrete recommendation, and to together with colleagues that join this event, with colleagues from IHRA and in Kate, to spread this toolkit when it will be finished. And also, I would love to have let's say, after this this step, to have the next step and to translate this toolkit in different languages, and to see how this toolkit can help not just Roma, but another vulnerable groups that are in situation to be discriminated. I have to stop because I see that my time is running very fast. But of course, I'm open for discussion, even now or later after our colleague from Ukraine will make their presentation. Natalia, thank you so much, colleagues, for your time.
Thank you so much, Elena, for presentation. And I would just to add at the end that as we are still in the process with Elena, and our meeting today is also important a source of information and feedback from you. So because you are from all different fields, and as we know that there are some people from protection field, but also some educators working with dialogue with Roma communities and our minorities. So we would like to ask you two questions, and I will post these questions on the chat later. If you could also respond, what patterns of discriminations and exclusion you have observed in your work with minorities, and in particular Roma minorities? And the second question, what strategies to address discrimination, exclusion, barriers were effective in your own work with these minorities and with Roma communities? So we would be very grateful if you could share this. And of course, please stay in touch with Elena and myself. Elena will share the contact details also on the chat, but we will still have you would be able also to ask the questions later if you have to Elena. Thank you, Sayan.
Okay, so thank you, Natalie. Thank you, Elena, for such wonderful presentation. And now I'll ask the audience to put their questions in the chat. If they have any, we'll take the questions together at the end towards the discussion. Okay, so now I'll invite our next speakers for giving their talk. The next speakers are Valentin and Mikola. Valentin Zaronkin is a researcher at the University of Kherson State University, and he's studying adaptation strategies of the Roma in the context of war and migration. He is also a co-founder of Ukrainian Center for Romani Studies in Ukraine. Professor Mykola Homaniuk is an associate professor at the Kherson State University and the chair of the Kherson branch of the Sociological Association of Ukraine. His research focuses on ethnic relations, including work on Roma communities and Meskhetian Turks in Ukraine. Since 2022, he has been a part of the Prisma Ukrainia War, Migration and Memory Initiative. So now I'll invite Valentin and Professor Mykola to speak on the history of the Roma communities, how it is reflected or overlooked in the current responses to the war in Ukraine. So the screen is yours, Professor Mykola and Valentin.
Sayan, I'll share my presentation. So, share. So, yeah. Can you see my slideshow?
Yes, it's visible,
Yeah.
Valentin.
Oh, thank you. So I would like to start with a broader question. How did approximately half of Ukrainian Roma manage to survive the Paraimas, the genocide of Roma during World War II, under the condition of occupation and target extermination? One of the answers suggested by researchers is the strategy of invisibility. the Roma people, tried not to stand out, not to reveal with ethnic identity, and to blend into the surrounding society. Importantly, in our contemporary research conducted by Ukrainian Center for Romani Studies in Kherson State University, we observe very similar strategies already in the context of the current Russian-Ukrainian war. Slide. After the full-scale invasion in 2022, around 100,000 Roma left Ukraine and moved to other countries. The issue received considerable attention in both media and reports by human rights organizations. As Natalia and Yelena have mentioned in previous speech, all these Roma people are Ukrainian citizens, but in practice they often face different treatment, not like other Ukrainian citizens. Roma were frequently perceived not as refugees but as economic migrants. This sometimes resulted in denial of housing or social assistance and so on. It is important that, in fact, in 2026, the number of Ukrainian Roma in European Union has not decreased. However, the issue has become much less visible in public and academic discourse. In response to these challenges, many Roma use strategies of invisibility. First of all, this involves construction of new social identity. People may choose not to disclose their ethnic background and present themselves simply as Ukrainians or sometimes as members of other nationalities. They often live in separate families rather than forming visible communities as they did in Ukraine. Appearance also played an important role. For example, many Roma women abandon their traditional long skirts, which make them easily identifiable, and adopt a more neutral style common in Europe. In this way, avoiding stigma became a rational and everyday strategy. At the same time, it is important to emphasize that it is not only about avoiding discrimination, but also about an active adaptation strategies. We observe that many Roma place strong emphasis on education, even if they themselves did not have access to education. They try to ensure it for their children. They encourage their children to study and take pride on their achievement in school. Education is seen as a key to their future, to adaptance in society. Another important mechanism is religious communities, most often Protestant ones. For many, these communities provide a space where ethnic background matters less, and they will feel more equal to others, like other people. Slide. So we can speak about the dual nature of these practices. On one hand, they are a response to discrimination and an attempt to avoid negative treatment. And on the other hand, their function is a resource for integration, helping people adapt and find their place in new society. In other words, these are both strategies of protection and strategies of development. So conclusion is As I have said, there are dual conclusions. Overall, the experience of Ukrainian Roma in European Union's countries can be described as complex but not unambiguous. On one hand, barriers and discrimination persist. On other hand, important positive transformation are already taking place, particularly in attitude toward education and integration. These changes may have long-term significance, I think. And thank you for your attention, and I'm waiting for your question. So stop sharing. Thank you, Sayan. The floor is yours.
Okay. So thank you, Valentin, for your presentation. Now I invite Professor Homaniuk for his short presentation and comments.
I will add just some comments from the Ukrainian side. I and Valentin Jaronkin and other members of Ukrainian Romani Studies Centers conducted, I don't know how many, maybe 100 interviews with Romani respondents in European countries and of course in Ukraine. And it's very interesting that this current strategy, this current ongoing war, draw attention to genocide of the Roma during the Second World War. Time to times, especially elderly people, compare current war with the Second World War, compare current tragedy of Ukrainian people, Romani people in Ukraine, with the tragedy of Roma during the Second World War, genocide. And I think it's very important to now to highlight the, let's say, information about genocide of the Roma during the by blending these two, not blending, but using these two discourse to draw attention both to genocide of the Roma and to Roma situation now in Ukraine.
I just add a few words that this data we have collected from Ukrainian Roma in Europe and Ukraine, it is super interesting not only for sociologists but also to linguists, to historians, and so on. So it's a huge database of 100 in-depth interviews. We just wanted to collaborate with the researchers join us. It's I think it may be interesting for researchers from different fields of study.
Yes, so thank you, Valentin. Thank you, Professor Homaniuk, for your presentation. Now, I'd like to invite the audience for asking any questions if they have any in the chat box. In the meanwhile, I'll invite Professor Pankowski for his comments. Hello, Professor Pankowski, would you like to comment?
Well, I would like to thank all the presenters. I think all the the voices we have just heard, they have given us a lot of food for thought, and especially given the current dramatic context of the war in Ukraine and the resulting displacement and the refugee movement on the one hand, and on the other hand, of course, we have the longer term context of the historical legacy of the oppression against the Roma, and that of course includes the genocide of the Roma during World War II. So I think that bringing together this current context and the long-term context, we are looking at a very specific juncture, which I think in a way makes our discussion today special. And I look forward to the follow-up also in the form of the toolkit that was mentioned. That would be a practical tool also for the representatives of the humanitarian and the refugee protection sector in combining those two perspectives. And I think it could also be an important tool also more broadly vis-a-vis the general public that, frankly speaking, is often very ignorant, both about the current day challenges facing the Roma, including the Roma refugees from Ukraine, but also the historical legacy of oppression of the Roma, including the Roma genocide and World War II. So thank you again. I think in so many ways we have been inspired to think along those lines. Thank you.
Okay, so there is a comment in the chat box from Elisabetta Mirga Vostowitz. It's on regarding the use of the term Porajmos, so I am reading it verbatim as it is. So, would like to make one important note regarding the use of the term Porajmos. It is currently not recommended as a primary term for referring to the genocide of Roma and should not be used uncritically. Its use may be considered acceptable only in specific contexts. For example, in historical or academic discussions, such as debates on terminology or memory politics, or when citing older publications, always with appropriate clarification. The term has not gained broad acceptance among Roma communities and is often perceived as externally imposed. In addition, in some variants of the Romani language, it carries problematic meanings such as devouring or consumption, which can evoke negative or culturally ambiguous associations. For this reason, its use as a neutral equivalent of genocide is increasingly questioned and discouraged. The most appropriate and safest formulations to use in new official and educational materials are genocide of Roma and Sinti or Roma and Sinti genocide, with an optional clarification at first use. In Romani, often referred to as Samudaripen. This approach ensures three things. Firstly, it ensures legal and historical precision. Secondly, it remains consistent with the practice of European institutions. And thirdly, while allowing the use of a Romani term as an autonomous memory concept without the semantic burdens associated with the term Porajmos. In the current European practices such as UE institutions, educational projects, and memory sites, the dominant terminology is Roma and Sinti genocide or Roma and Sinti Holocaust with optional complementary use of the term Samudaripen. So I'd like invite now all the presenters to comment on this if anyone has any comments.
I just want to say thank you for comment. I understand the ambiguity surrounding the use of the term Paramos. However, it is used. In fact, it is used by many Roma as well as many resources. But of course, you're right. Maybe I should use the term Roma you have said Roma genocide.
Yes, so would like to contribute to these comments. Thank you, Elžbieta, for your comment. Of course, you're right, and also I would like to know that we in Ukraine this poemas is used in one textbook. That doesn't matter, and also activists, Ukrainian Roman activists use a term in kalitrash, but for ordinary Roma people, all these words, all these mentioned words by you, by Valentin, by me, are absolutely unfamiliar. They use the description, the time when Germans were killing Roma. This is a most common term for genocide of the Roma among Ukrainian Roma.
Okay. So thank you, Valentin and Professor Homaniak. I guess Elena had some questions or comments at the beginning. Elena, you can ask them now.
So actually the question is well, before I was sorry. I was listening you very, very careful, and I understand that actually we have to learn all together a lesson in crisis time, in war time, in economical crisis time, in when we have different crises, doesn't matter which one. The mostly vulnerable person, in our case, we are talking about Roma, became first victim of them, of the crisis. So before we judge, it's good to learn about this group of person, about Roma. It's good to have a lot of social cohesion, discussion, activities, because until we don't know each other, until we don't know who is our neighbor, we're gonna have this discrimination, segregation, and this is just half step to the hate speech and hate crimes. My question was, Natalia, can you please read it for me? Because I'm from the phone, my internet is slow.
Где?
In my presentation, please, if you don't mind.
Yes. The question, which one do you mean?
The second one, the last page.
What strategies? Yes.
Yeah.
What
Yes.
strategies to address discrimination, exclusion, and barriers were effective in your work with minorities, including Roma people?
So I'd love to share very brief with you, dear colleagues, that Romnia, Moldova, in 2024, we did, we write strategy of inclusion for Roma refugee. Of course, you're gonna find, Natalia will spread for you, or we're gonna find the source in the toolkit. So what was important that before to have a strategy of inclusion, is good to have a plan, a strategic plan of lobby and advocacy. So what we do, that we have allies, aligners from different institutions here in Moldova, and try to implement this strategy. So for now, we have almost 60% of Roma kids, refugee, that going to the school and in the kindergarten. So this doesn't matter which plan of activities, program, strategy. It's important to collect the real needs, to have a data collection, to have a mapping of their problem, and then we can do a very right or very organized strategy of inclusion that we did in Moldova. Maybe you can share some experience from your country. I will be very happy to learn.
So would any of you like, I invite the speakers to answer this question.
Okay, of course, Elena, you're right about the vulnerability national minorities groups, especially Roma minorities, in the period of war conflicts. It is a really common thing in the world. The minorities are much more vulnerable in the war than the national majority.
And affected, yes.
Yeah. And what about the second part of your comment about strategies? Okay, we are researchers, we are not human rights organization. We investigate Roma strategies. The migration is a strategy to escape from war, and Roma use this strategy very effectively. Many Ukrainian Roma effectively escape from the frontline zone, and in some cases much more effectively than, for example, Ukrainians. Their adaptation in Europe is a strategy. The invisibility it is a strategy too, and so it really works. All these things really works, and of course, our explanation describe many vulnerable things, many discriminations, and so on. But in fact, it's not only about discrimination, but it's about chances to find their way in life. Many our respondents said that we want to be Roma. We don't want that our children became Gajos, non-Roma, but we really want to integrate them into society, because we don't want that they will be as vulnerable as we did in our past.
Dear Valentin, thank you so much. Just two very quick inputs. So agree with you, and I'm always saying that from integration and assimilation is just half of step. It's millimetric, and of course Roma afraid of this. So for us, it's very important to understand their specific needs, cultural needs, linguistic needs, and so on, and to adapt political strategy of inclusion to adapt with them. Why not? For example, here in Moldova was a discussion to use home learning, as a lot of people have in USA. That's one, for example, option. So the input from our side, as NGO, as a researcher, doesn't matter. As a person that care about these people, is to have double effort. One hand, we have Roma community that we have to educate it, and to promote messages of education, of GBV, about everything. And on the other hand, we have government institutions that we have to understand them. We have to teach them to understand that adaptation of political strategies of public political, actually, it's important to adaptate on their cultural needs. That's my personal point of view, you know. Of course, this can be very big discussion on it, but yes, thank you so much. And if you don't mind, Natalia, I'm sorry, I'm not gonna take your floor. We have here, I hope she's still from Poland, my colleague, Ella Mirga. Ella, so I'm not sure if she's still here, but she have very good experience on working with refugee. Ella, if you here and if you can give us 2-3 minutes of your inputs. Okay.
I think Ella wrote on the chat, but she's on the meeting. She's listening. Yes.
Oh, she can know.
Yes.
Okay.
But I just like to take the floor also to thank all the speakers also, because we have been working all together for a long time, and this is an important discussion, and we will continue this discussion, and it's just the beginning. So we have a kind of a space where we can raise these difficult issues about minorities, about the Roma, but also host communities, and what we can do. So thank you. And I will also ask maybe our moderator, Sayan, to summarize everything and to say the last words.
So,
thank you, everyone.
So I would like to thank you all for making this discussion such fruitful and such. I learned a lot from this. And so before ending, I'd like to read a short comment by Andy Haywood, where he compares the situation of the Romani people in UK with that of the continental Europe. He says that clearly there are many similarities with the Romani people in the UK, but also differences due to the geographic location. The anti-racism education training that we offer across the UK through Show Racism, the Red Cross is supported through our partnerships with organizations such as Pride of Romani and the Traveller Movement. There is certainly more we can be doing to highlight the issues that have been shared today. Thank you again. So with that, I would like to wrap up today's discussion, and the recording would be shared with everyone who has registered and all other people. So thank you again.